Donald Trump, like, it seems like he's pulling the plug on even trying anymore. Tries to sit down with Vladimir Putin, tries to get Putin to negotiate. But as you and I have observed and talked about regularly, Vladimir Putin's got his list of demands. He's not wavering from them. And so you end the discussion with nobody conceding to anything that he wants. You're not going to get a settlement. And then the bombs and the drones start flying again.
Well, yeah, and and I honestly find the whole episode puzzling. I mean, let's go back to when the 50-day deadline was set. I thought that was kind of odd because I didn't understand what was 50 days tied to.
I know.
Why would you say, all right, we've already gone 6 months in the Trump administration. Why another 50 days, and why would that be any different? And then why did it go from 50 to now 10 or a dozen, something like that? But still, we have the same thing looming out that we did when that first 50-day deadline was set. What is going to happen if he tries to impose those secondary sanctions on Russia? And the primary issue is not what they do to Russia, because Russia is basically sanction proof already. It's the secondary sanctions that they slap the tariffs on China, India, Brazil, and anyone else, they say, who does business with Russia with hydrocarbons, et cetera. I don't know that you're going to succeed if you're going to try to get our friend India to say don't buy Russian oil, or it's going to get it from somewhere else. Where else are you going to get it?
Right.
And then of course we have the issue with China. We're still in a trade issue with them, and if you slap another 100%. I mean, that it hurt us last time when we had 145%. So I just don't see how this is going to help our case, much less hurt Russia.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. As we enter into more thoughtful and I guess deep trade negotiations on tariffs with China in our negotiation process with them, these secondary tariffs, I think is just going to blow that up. I would imagine China's not going to stand for it in a discussion.
Well, I mean, because you've spent so many months and so much, political capital trying to come up to some kind of a mutually acceptable financial deal, and apparently they are making some progress.
Yep.
But you toss something like this on top, it'll literally blow up everything you've been doing and set us back, several months, and that's just not going to be good for American consumers or business.
Well, let me get your reaction to this, because my first reaction was, this is childish. When we talk about, and we have before, when Ukraine wants to strike and strikes targets within Russia, you and I both scratch our head and wonder, to what end? It's not like they're going to make advances and take over Russian territory. They don't have enough troops to keep the territory if they took it. But when they choose targets to bomb, last time I checked, it was resort towns. There's not even a military objective. If you're bombing a beach where people go to vacation, what possible benefit could that be? And of course, then the Russians retaliate by bombing the Ukraine resort towns. Not military objectives either. Those are civilian targets. So what's the point of this exercise? Again, it seems like children playing war games.
Well, and part of the problem for the Ukraine side is that they don't have they have limited number of offensive missiles and drones. So they have some that can get in, but not that many. Russia, on the other hand, has more than enough air defense missiles, unlike the Ukraine side and the Western side, who are in a significant dearth of those interceptor missiles. Russia has no shortage, but they have them. They do have a huge country, so they have to pick and choose where they put them. So on the militarily important targets, they have a lot of air defense. So Ukraine doesn't want to waste its missiles where they don't even get, they don't even have video of burning buildings in Russia. So they go places where there aren't air defenses. Or there are not very many, and so they can get the video, because this is all about just having impressions and media outlets. I mean, that's just the truth of it. They want the video footage to show that they're doing something. There is no military path, so it's not an issue that, well, this won't help the front line, because nothing will, which of course exposes the absurdity of continuing to fight a war you can't win.
No question about it. And it's just week after week after week, we keep coming up with the same conclusions, Daniel Davis. And we don't have I think one of the things we learned from COVID is we need to start making our own stuff and not being so reliant on China. This is a moment of clarity for our U.S. military, because, the world is clamoring for our weapons and asking for Patriots and wanting this and that. We don't even have enough of our own. You mentioned many times on this program, we talked about it last week, we can only make 600 Patriot missiles a year. I mean, I'm sorry, the demand is much greater than the supply, and we have an obligation to our own people to protect our people from threats abroad and domestically. And for that, you need a stockpile of weapons. And apparently we don't have enough.
Yeah, I mean you said it's a moment of clarity. I would say it should be a moment of clarity, but it doesn't seem to be because I mean what was it more than a year ago is when we expanded. I guess maybe 2 years ago we expanded our capacity because it was 500 missiles per year at the outset of the war. Now it's up to around 600. But I mean, unless I missed something, I haven't seen anybody say, "All right, we have this emergency contract here, we're going to triple it or something to that effect. We'll go way above what it is. Now that you see how many interceptors it takes to sustain combat, clearly we don't have enough. And by the way, the last credible information I've gotten from somebody who has access to the inside of the Pentagon, it'll take about 5 years for us to replace our own stockpiles. And that number doesn't even start 5 years until we stop giving everything that comes off the foundation to somebody else right now, to whether it's to Israel or to Ukraine. So we need to do something. So you say clarity, but I don't see that clarity has turned into policy.
It's okay. The European Union's going to buy $750 billion worth of military hardware from domestic military hardware manufacturers, thus ensuring the longevity of the military industrial complex.
Yeah, and I see that, and certainly from an American perspective, that's a big number. And then investing $600 billion in our energy, all this, I mean, all that is really good. But I mean, you still have that bottleneck there. It matters how much you can produce and how fast. So a lot of dollars are being thrown around, but you don't have the capacity to do anything bigger. You just have the ability for the status quo to continue to perpetuate for the military-industrial complex. But that doesn't do a whole lot for our national security.
All right, Daniel Davis, let's walk down that dangerous road and talk about Israel, Gaza, and Iran. Now, obviously, you and I think the whole world can agree there is a massive humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza. There are people literally starving. And I think one of the things I stepped in the other day was about this getting aid into Gaza, getting food to people who obviously need it. Two sides every story. You got Israel, and maybe they're to blame. You got the Hamas terrorists maybe preventing the aid from getting it to people. But as soon as aid shows up, it's like any group of starving people. It just turns absolutely chaotic. I know I saw a massive crowd storming one of the aid trucks. And the UN obviously seems to me to be always seems to me to be a pointless exercise, incapable of really providing any benefit anywhere. But they can't even seem to resolve the situation. How can we just get food in there?
Yeah, that's the central problem right now. The problem with the UN is they have no power. They can only have influence and only try to say something, but that requires primarily Israel on the ground because they're the only ones that actually have power over this situation. And just in a form of context for people to understand why we're in this starvation situation, Israel decided they didn't like the UN program that was feeding people, UNRWA, it's called. And so they shut that down, and then they formed this new one. And of course, they had shut it off from March up until just very recently. Now then, they have 4 food designation points where they can have it. That's why you see this chaos here, because the entire Gaza Strip has to swarm in on 4 points. They had 400 before that. And so it's a lot easier to distribute food more orderly when you have multiple places and routine food coming in. But unfortunately, Israel has restricted it to 4, and the number of trucks is about a fifth what is needed for just the basic sustenance. Ergo, you have people starving to death because there's not enough food getting into the population. And look, whatever you want to say about anything, policies or who's right or wrong, Israel has the power over the food, and right now they are not releasing. They're not opening the gates, and they're not letting the rest of the trucks get in. And we see what the result is on the ground.
And I have not looked for, nor have I read an explanation for why it went for that approach. I presume on some measure, Israel wants to manage the distribution of food to keep it out of the hands of Hamas and get it to the people who actually are starving, but that Hamas is quite often commandeering the food supplies. It's more food supplies, more trucks, more distribution centers. It seems to me might still be managed by Israel if they broaden the effort. But there is that threat of Hamas and that concern about Hamas taking the supplies from the people they purport to represent.
Well, but the reality is you're not doing any of that. You're not preventing, even the way they're doing it now, it's not preventing food from getting to Hamas. They have no idea who's Hamas and who's just Palestinian. Yeah. So by saying that's what they're trying to do, what they're doing is starving other people. You're not going to prevent that. You can't. I mean, the Hamas is Palestine. I mean, they are part of it. So you can't distinguish where the food goes because Israel has no control whatsoever over where that food goes in those four distribution points. Once it goes in there, they don't know where it goes, whether it's 4 or 400. So that's not an attainable objective because it can't be met. But this is just not a military solvable question. And look, at some point, you're just going to have to say either Israel is going to literally starve everyone to death, or they're going to have to open the gates, and they're coming under a lot more pressure. And I personally find that reprehensible. They're using starvation as a tool. It's just awful.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of using civilian captives as a tool, I find that from a humanitarian perspective and an ethical perspective, pretty awful too. But what's the downside risk of just opening the gates and allowing food in? We're not talking about military or anything like that. Just letting the food in and letting it go where it may.
Listen, Brian, we got to be honest, and especially, and I'm not talking secret stuff here. I'm talking absolute open discussion within senior Israeli positions and on Israeli media. They want the Palestinians out. They don't want to open the gates and let the food in that would now then remove the pressure to get them. I think it's pretty clear from evidence that what they want is to compel or coerce other regional countries, whether that's in Africa, there's been some talk there, or in other Arab countries, that they want them to see how bad this is and say, all right, we'll just alleviate the suffering. Let them come here. Let 500,000 come here, something like that, or go anywhere because they want them out. So there are many in Israel who don't want to solve that problem because they want to keep the pressure on that could possibly get them out. And that's just the uncomfortable truth.
So they wanted to park. They wanted to be just big as an empty parking lot.
That is what they want. They have a plan right now. It was out just last week. There's many discussing openly the reoccupation of Gaza to Israeli people, meaning they have to first get the current occupants out.